Walt, there's been no slowdown in the autonomy markets this summer, especially during earnings week. While you put on your Aurora sleuth hat and joined the PACCAR earnings call, I put on my Inspector Cousteau hat and I called Zoox. That's right, I did call Zoox. And I took a closer look at Tesla sensors during an Uber ride. I learned something. But Walt, let's first start with Tesla earnings. I saw the stock drop 9% on the earnings. What happened? Did Optimus take over the Robotaxi program? What happened?
It's always curious, like what impacts stocks on the given day. You know, some will talk about one sentence fragment that Elon, who talks a lot and depends on his mood or what he wants to talk about during that quarter, that could vary about a lot of different topics, but mention perhaps some rough quarters ahead. As you know, this $7,500 subsidy in the United States is getting removed. But I mean, it's kind of odd, though, if you think about it, to maybe focus. And who knows what the quarter was on, why it was down. But the real value in this thing, obviously, is going to occur over the next 10 years in terms of what happens with Robotaxi, what happens with Optimus. And maybe there just wasn't enough new information or new details around what they were doing there to get people excited following the quarter. I think there was some hope that maybe they would play up a little bit more of the progress and next catalyst to expect in terms of Robotaxi.
What are the exact details investors are looking for in Robotaxi? Is it rides? Is it miles? Is it, or as you alluded to, is it expansion? What are investors looking for?
I mean, there was some reference to expansion. They talked about San Francisco, but they're going to put a driver in for San Francisco, not because of the performance of the technology, because of the California regulatory environment that you know so well. But to answer your question, Grayson, I think what the next big catalyst for them is going to be to take that safety attendant out of the car and just gives more, kind of confidence that of where they see the market being, or in terms of the technology being, and obviously expanding to additional markets. But I think the bigger one at this point is taking that safety attendant out.
Do you have any thoughts on, based on our experience that we had in Austin, when that a safety attendant might potentially be removed from the vehicle or some of the vehicles, perhaps a mixed fleet?
I mean, there's a lot of other questions that were getting addressed in the call, so I don't think they really talked about that at all. There was this kind of reiteration of doing or making Robotaxi available to half the U.S. population by the end of the year. I would guess that most investors think of that as more of aspirational or a goal that Elon likes to set out there to kind of trying to challenge his people. But I don't know, like, what are your thoughts? I mean, we both felt like it was ready, but you can't really know.
I think the biggest issue, and I'm going back to what Mr. Musk has said about safety, is I'm worried about a bad actor getting in the vehicle and trying to do something to cause damage to create headlines. To me, that is a huge risk that hasn't really been discussed enough.
That's always going to be a risk. At some point, you're going to have to rip that Band-Aid off, though, and take that attendant out, or maybe move the attendant to the back seat, and have the riders go to the front seat, something.
And I know this sounds crazy, but just hear me out. Or do they wait to remove the attendant until Cybercab can legally operate because there is no wheel?
To your point, a bad actor can do a number of different things. I think if you went back to our video of our experience in Austin, our belief was, again, a guess, we don't know, that the safety attendant, when his hand was on that, door open button, that would probably shut the car down, or at least have it, go to the side of the road. So to your point, like if there's no wheel in there, then, and the person tries to jump out of the car or do something crazy like that, there's obviously other things that can be done. But the problem with that, Grayson, is I don't want to wait until a car doesn't have a wheel in it before we see no safety attendant in this car. So I think at some point you just have to move forward. And I think you can't just always be worried about the bad actors. And I think, look, maybe we'll see over time as more and more people, get in the car and they expand the friendly users, or however you want to call it, the beta testing of the users, that'll get them closer to a point where they'll feel more comfortable with taking that safety attendant out.
Do you think that as more people try FSD, and was really interesting on the call, they mentioned that less than 50% have actually tried FSD, that can potentially lead to an acceleration, removing the attendant because people are more comfortable with that technology?
I think those are really two different issues, right? What you're referring to is something that can potentially drive revenue for the company with the existing Tesla owners that are out there. And the stat was specifically that 50% of people that own a Tesla that is capable of FSD haven't even tried it once. Now, they have already seen an increase in FSD adoption, but there's a huge market opportunity for them to get it. And they should be drivers like me that many listeners will say, like, what I'm about to describe is just ADAS, which is that I get in the car and I have FSD drive every time. Why? Because it's a better drive than I have, and it's a safer ride. And yes, I am paying attention in terms of the safety. And they did give stats in terms of the safety between that type of riding and someone that doesn't use FSD from their own drivers of Teslas. But I will say that when I picked up my new Tesla Y, there was no, like, from the salespeople that were basically handing the car off to me, there was no training or pushing or saying, hey, you should try this out. There was no pop-up on the screen saying, like, here's the way you activate FSD. It was a lost opportunity where they had a touch point with a customer. Granted, I'm an existing Y customer, but every time someone steps in that store, they should be pushing or at least showing the benefits of FSD and preaching that. And I think, at least in my case of picking up the car, that wasn't done. So I think there's some better execution that they can do within the dealership, or not the dealership, but the where you pick up the car to help in that process.
The delivery center, how great would it be, you buy a Sony TV, or buy a Vizio TV, or you buy the Android TV, it has to pop up with all their software. How great would it be when you get your Tesla? Welcome, new Tesla owner. Would you like to try FSD? Pop up on the software screen. That could potentially increase adoption.
I mean, any new app that I ever download on my iPhone always has those initial tutorials, which are sometimes annoying. Look, at some point when we get to, if the car is delivered to you autonomously, that will also obviously advertise to the customer that this FSD exists. So I think there's wood to chop there. There's better execution. I'd also say on the call, when they were asked about driver out and a lot of these things, the emphasis of, like, we want to be safe. We want to be safe. I wish I should do probably a word count on, this safety issue, because again, this is stuff I've talked to you about many times on this podcast, where I think that there's a greater safety of culture at Tesla than I think a lot of people give them credit for. Does that mean that this is definitively the most safe thing and that there's not risk and that there's not going to be an accident? Of course not. Like, I'm still concerned about that. We're evaluating this on a daily basis. But from my experience with SpaceX before, I just think that they get criticized perhaps too much with their views towards safety. So you can't say, like, hey, you're criticize them for keeping that, the driver attendant in, and then say they're not safe. Like, pick your criticism of how you want to attack this company.
I'll say, from an owner of a Tesla, I'm more comfortable and I feel safer using FSD than I do driving as a human. And there's been well documented other people feel that way. It's truly a safe product. And yes, there will be instances at some point, but I truly believe it is a safe product.
Right. So look, as far as the stock is concerned, again, this is ultimately going to become a story stock based on whatever the next catalyst is. And in this case, the catalyst was perhaps an earnings call where there wasn't enough attention paid to new information. I mean, if from a technology standpoint, Grayson, like, what type of safety stats would you like to start getting on a regular basis from a company like this that you think would help? Because when Tesla reports, obviously this gets blasted across plenty of mainstream news channels.
I'll say something very controversial, Walt. I don't want safety numbers. I want vehicle numbers, I want miles driven, and I want revenue numbers. To me, the safety is inherent and it shouldn't really be touted.
Okay. I mean, I feel like they should continue to provide that data, to provide those of us that, believe the autonomy industry is economy changing, can use as evidence, because this is, obviously a concern, especially as it relates to Tesla, that we constantly get from investors and just, industry watchers about, are their cars safe or not? It's the number one issue I deal with on a daily basis.
I could see a point where the Tesla policy team gives all that safety data to regulators on an ongoing basis to build the trust with regulators. I think that the trust is building just the way that FSD is used. So I'm not really worried about those metrics on the call. Or, yes, is it nice if Tesla publishes it? Yes, it's nice. But to me, it's not a defining factor where this is going.
We can agree to disagree on that one. I want more disclosure. What else did we learn about Tesla this week?
You want disclosure, and I want headlines. And Bloomberg gave us a headline this week, and it was confirmed by the Nevada Department of Transportation, the Nevada Department of Motor Vehicles, that Tesla is looking to expand to Nevada with Robotaxi. Great regulatory environment, obviously a lot of demand there if they were going to do it in Las Vegas. And Tesla has a presence in the state, in the Reno area. what are your thoughts on the potential of Tesla expanding Robotaxi to Las Vegas?
I go to Las Vegas at least once every year for our big CES event that we do. So I love the fact that now we have Neuro with stuff to see there. I think Zoox we'll get into in a little bit. Getting a Tesla Robotaxi in Vegas would also be great. I mean, look, they already have the tunnel, right, where they have people driving those cars. So it's pretty obvious that should be the initial transition to be driver out is going through the boring tunnel that exists there. But certainly the Robotaxis can do far more than just running through a dedicated tunnel.
But, well, this, after all, is Nevada. There's a thing called unions. You cannot legally operate in a tunnel without a human behind the wheel. But you can operate on the roadway.
So you can operate on the roadway without a driver, but not in a tunnel. So, okay, does a national framework help us to get through that possibly?
Potentially, depending on how the framework is drafted and the language used in that, yes. But it's Vegas and things are different after all.
Okay, well, Elon can also be a very large employer in your state. So maybe you want to reconsider some of these laws.
They should reconsider, and I'm going to stay on the reconsideration, and I'm going through X, and I literally fell out of my chair. Zoox puts up a very public post that says, now calling early riders to ride. And they put up a phone number. So, Cousteau here, I put on my magical Zoox mobile hat, and I called 1-888-477-5055. And boy, oh boy, they told me a lot. I learned the following about Zoox's operation in Las Vegas. When I asked about the number of vehicles, I said, sir, how many vehicles? Well, we have enough. I said, do I have to wait? He wouldn't tell me the exact number, but he said, you won't have to wait. Okay, that I question. Then I found out the hours of operation are from 11 a.m. to 1 a.m. local Vegas time. You do not get to use the Zoox app. That was kind of surprising. You check in at a concierge desk, and that individual walks you to the Robotaxi, launches the Robotaxi. So I said, oh, this is great. Where can I go in the Zoox mobile? He said, Luxor. I said, okay, what else can I go? He goes, no, that's it. So it goes from Resort World to the Luxor and back. It's a 45-minute round trip. I said, okay, where else can I go? Well, you can't do that. This is how it works. And then I said, well, okay, well, how do the vehicles run? Do they run on the side streets? Do they run down the strip? He goes, no, they go down the strip. And I go, what happens when I get to the Luxor? He goes, you get out of the vehicle and the next concierge attendant will launch the vehicle to send you back home. I said, so what's the purpose of this? He's like, well, it's to introduce people to technology. Well, companies were doing this 6, 7, 8 years ago for employees from destination to destination. I know I criticize Zoox a lot, but this just seems like a Las Vegas Disneyland ride. What do you think?
First of all, I've got some questions to break down here. When you said you don't need a Zoox app, is there a Zoox app that exists today that you're aware of? I mean, in this case, I know you're not going to be using one, but is there one that you know of?
So let's go way back. And Tim Kentley-Clay, sir, I know you listen. I'll let that live at that. Tim Kentley-Clay was the co-founder of Zoox along with Jesse Levinson. Tim and Jesse hosted me years and years ago at Slack at Stanford, the accelerator, where I went, and it was called The Sled, and I got to play with a prototype Zoox app to hail it. So yes, there is a Zoox app, but you, as an early rider, cannot use that app.
Okay, so I would think, though, that, or I would hope at least, given that, Zoox is in San Francisco, I guess, to a certain extent, that they'd be developing an app. So let's just assume that some version of an app exists. Clearly, you don't need a complex app if you're going from point A to point B. So my second question is the way this person described it to you, that like the concierge is going to have to go in there and as you would say, bippity boppity boop, hit some buttons to send it back? Or is that person going to have their own app that they're sending this car back and forth? Was that clear or was that unclear from your discussion?
It was very unclear. The way that it was described to me, the concierge individual will walk you to the vehicle and launch you. Whether you hit the button inside the Zoox vehicle or they hit an app button, uncertain.
I know that's a finer detail and who really cares, but having that human there to do that seems odd. My third observation is, not to sound too elitist, but like Luxor and resorts are probably not two of my primary destinations. I'd have to think about the Strip and whether they're closer to other locations. Seems like an odd thing in that they wouldn't make a stop along the way. Any sense on why they picked those two? Or is your knowledge of the Strip such that it's a good reason for having those two locations.
Unfortunately, my knowledge of the strip is vast, and I say unfortunately on that front. It is one end of the strip is Resort World, managed by Hilton, going to Luxor, which is managed by MGM. So I don't understand that combination there from a corporate standpoint. But it's from one end of the strip to the other, essentially, is what it is. To me, it's a Disneyland ride. Think about this. We were talking about Space Mountain. You go on Space Mountain, the attendant hits the little button and zoom, away you go. And the Zoox person hits the button, zoom, away you go. It's a Disneyland attraction.
So to your point, like you had the opportunity maybe to with MGM to go from Luxor, which I guess is MGM, to I don't know, Aria, which I believe is an MGM property, and you didn't do that when you could, possibly pick up some some promotion from them. That seems odd. Is that really true?
That's really true. And yes, this launch seems extremely odd. Is it to prove the technology because of the distance? But I don't want to sit in a mobile to go 45 minutes from one end of the strip to the other
On a straight run.
I'm going to be bored out of my mind.
On a longer straight run, to me is not as compelling, given that you and I have both done a lot of these driver out tests now. We want to see picking a destination, the route that it goes, making unprotected lefts, not being on effectively like rails, like a glideways, where you're basically like rails from point A to point B. I'm not sure that really highlights the technology. But with that said, I look forward to another road trip with you, Grayson. Maybe we should hit Vegas, given there's so many technology. It'll be great to go from one to the other, maybe from a Nuro to a Zoox and hopefully some form of Robotaxi at that point.
I definitely think we need to do a Vegas road trip to experience what's out there. And I do want to give you the most important aspect that the concierge told me when I called. You ready for this, Walt? I literally fell out of my chair and had a cow. I call up and it said to this, it was a man. And I said, sir, I don't like being around people. I like to be by myself. And I can't go in a vehicle with anybody. Oh, don't worry about that. Single riders are fully permitted. That was a big change. Single riders are permitted in the Zoox mobile, according to the concierge. That's a big deal.
That's a big deal to you. It's not as big of a deal to me. I never thought that this shared ride situation was something that was going to stick with Zoox. I think this is just one of the things. So we'll see, let's get to Vegas, try it out. We'll report back, another Autonomy Markets road trip looks like it's on the horizon.
It's on the horizon. And for our listeners and viewers, I had the opportunity years ago to go in the Lyft Motional Active vehicle in Vegas. Yes, there was a safety driver. Yes, we're a safety engineer. But we got to pick destinations. So I'm going to compare that to the Zoox mobile because there is a benchmark there. Well, staying on the Vegas theme, let's get back to Tesla. I got to ask you a question. We're going to go prediction corner here. If Tesla does indeed launch Robotaxi in Las Vegas, as we clearly see there's a paper trail there, who charges for commercial service first, Tesla or Zoox?
If charging is $4.20, then I would guess that Tesla's probably queued up to do that faster. But we're rooting for you, Zoox. We want you to progress this technology as fast as possible to continue to have more competition in the market. But I'm going to go with even though Tesla's not even announced in the market, no agreements in place, I'm going to say, you're going to see paid rides for them first. And it's fine for that to be driver attendant, right? In your definition of this prediction?
Yes, as long as there's a financial transaction.
Perfect. Yes, Tesla.
Okay, so Zoox 6 years ago, 2019, first started testing in Las Vegas. Your prediction comes true, and I agree with you. How do Amazon investors react? Because it seems that you had a 6-year head start, but yet Tesla comes out of here and they surpass you.
A 6-year lead with a vehicle that has LiDAR. This is heresy for us to suggest that maybe something without LiDAR could beat something that's allegedly years and years ahead. I don't think Amazon investors are really paying attention in terms of what's going on or not going on at Zoox. In Google, obviously Waymo, much bigger presence, much further along, a lot of revenue getting generated from that company. So that's more meaningful. Although to be fair, Waymo was barely discussed on the Google call. We'll get to that later. So I don't know. I don't think Amazon investor care. I don't know if that really, Grayson, though, means that just because investors aren't asking questions and pressuring senior management, that there's not some level of accountability there and maybe some asking of questions on what is going on with this project.
I'm asking questions mainly because I'm curious, and they had such a head start, and it seems like it's kind of stuck in neutral. That's why I'm asking the questions. And I go through the transcripts and I listen to the Amazon earnings calls, and I have not heard one single question asked about Zoox, and it's kind of mind blowing because if you listen to the Tesla call, you listen to the Alphabet call, everybody asked about Waymo. And as you and I both know, there's a lot of interest from the investor community in Robotaxi, so I'm just surprised it doesn't come up. Does that dam ever break at some point? Does some analyst ask the question finally, perhaps listening to us ramble about it?
I'm going to answer just what I said before and now a little bit more direct to you. No, that does not happen. This is going to have to be a decision by senior management. Sorry, it doesn't. It's more likely to happen at Apple, that hasn't really come up with new products and sees their revenue growth. But Amazon's got other growth engines that are out there that, remove pressure. When companies are not doing well, then that, creates questions for different product lines where there's some investment. But no, it will never generate pressure from senior management.
Okay, I'll agree to disagree. At some point, pressure will build, and they're going to have to do something with the program. But let's move on. So on the Q2 2025 earnings call, Elon said about the expansion, you highlighted the Bay Area, but they're also looking at Florida. Great, we want you here because of the regulatory environment. They're also looking at Arizona. How fast do you see Tesla truly scaling Robotaxi?
I think when it happens, it's going to happen very fast because unlike Waymo, you don't have this process of acquiring cars from another company and then outfitting them with sensors and then testing those sensors and then, setting up all of the charging, which obviously Tesla's got this incredible charging network, which we talked about was important. There should be, like we saw with Avomo and Waymo in Austin, probably an area where there's going to be some maintenance. But, I think, Grayson, you super sleuthed something else. One of the key sensors on a Tesla car is the camera that's like right under basically your front license plate. And why don't you tell us what you found?
Last night, I'm in an Uber, and the gentleman picked me up in the new Model Y, which is a great car. I know we harp on it, but really great suspension, so I have to highlight that. And I noticed something. The individual hit a button on the screen. I said, how did you do that? What did it do in here? They have a cleaner. They have a camera. That front camera cleans. And so I take a photo. The gentleman wouldn't let me take a video, but I asked for permission. I was able to take a photo. So Walt has a new Model Y. I show it to him today. Lo and behold, he goes to his car, and it's there. What did you think, Walt, when you experienced it?
Well, I think it's just one of those additions for the new car that shows the importance of the sensor. But the reason I bring that up is, A, it's just a fun little discovery. And maybe we'll post a video here or on Twitter, X, for people to check it out. It's just kind of funny. Not a major discovery, but fun. But just speaks to, that's the sensor. It's a camera. There's a little water jet that cleans it. As opposed to, again, Waymo of Omo, where you've got all of these, high-tech LiDAR things that are spinning around that need to go back and get recalibrated. It'll be interesting to see what that sensor failure rate is like, or fixing rate is like, and what type of infrastructure Tesla is going to have to build, in order to support that. And by the way, so we went down this kind of thought path to get back to your original question. That speaks to the speed at which you can launch in these additional markets. So let me relate this to Waymo. Like, the conclusion that we got from Austin and seeing the infrastructure build, the charging, the servicing, is you're just not going to see Waymo in New York in the near term because of this infrastructure that needs to get built out. So that has to be a key component to how we think about this race. So when people talk about one company being years ahead of another one, 100% the technology is the base level critical element of that. Like, you have to get your technology to work with the driver, and the driver attendant have to get out and you don't get into accidents, right? But then when you go to step 2, you got to be able to source cars quickly. You got to be able to charge and clean those cars at scale in markets that have the real estate and the power that enable you to do that. So we will continue to harp on this, as we have, over many episodes in the past. But that is an important element. And I think in Tesla's case, there are elements to this in terms of the sensors, the charger network, and the car availability, that if they can get the technology to the point where it's perceived or is actually safe, not perceived, is actually safe, that expansion can happen very quickly.
I want to emphasize the point around maintenance. You're right. The Tesla Model Ys are a lot more cost effective to maintain from a maintenance standpoint compared to a Waymo vehicle with lots of sensors, which I was thinking a lot about this last night after the gentleman showed me the button to clean the sensors. The more I think about this, the more I truly believe that Tesla built the new Model Y for Robotaxi. That was part of this grand master plan. The more I think about it, and the more time I spend in the new Model Y.
Look, I think Robotaxi has been on Elon's mind for a long time. I don't know if the Y was specifically built for Robotaxi. It certainly will be a very important model for them as these fleets expand. We'll see what the mix is between Ys that go into their own ownership versus people putting their Ys into the network. One of the other things talked about, I think, on the earnings call is the software development that we've seen and experienced on our own in Austin is now going to be extended to Model Y and other Tesla owners that have the hardware for. So I'm looking forward to that. I think those changes, I don't think it's going to change how my car feels because my car already feels pretty natural, but those drop-offs and pickups, which were excellent when we were in Austin, I think it'd be great to have that added as an increased improvement in terms of the 13 dot whatever I'm running right now.
Absolutely. Another thing I'm going to watch for. I have the new Model 3. I don't have that sensor cleaning function. I'm going to see if new vehicles going forward, new models, perhaps the Q model that's coming, the smaller one has that. That'll be a clear sign.
Grayson, before we move on to the last topic, since you were a long time or at least a part-time California resident. Again, going back to what I said before on Elon saying that there will be a driver-in launch, I think in San Francisco or somewhere in the Bay Area with Tesla. What is this focus on California? Like, why even bother, with being in California, given the regulatory restrictions that exist there?
I don't know. I truly don't know. What I've seen over the years from the vast experience that I have in this industry is the engineers' desire and want to live there. That is the only thing that I could see. There's been lots of talks where companies wanted to leave California. We saw that with trucking. They went to the Dallas area. But it just seems that California has this great magnet that's continuously attracting individuals. But from a business operations standpoint, the regulatory environment is very, very harsh. It's very hard to do business. We if you want to call it, we had a huge blow this week when In-N-Out announced they're moving their corporate headquarters to Franklin, Tennessee. So it's been well documented. It's a very hard place to do business. I don't know why the robotaxi companies want to be there and deal with all the regulation. I truly don't know. Why do you think they want to be there? Is it the market size? Is it the allure? What do you think?
I mean, I think, it could be precisely why, you want to be there is to show people that you have succeeded in what is probably one of the more challenging markets, in the country from a regulatory standpoint. New York is probably even a bigger one, because not only do you have the regulatory issues here, the union issues here, but also just the topography, the weather, and the traffic that we deal with in Midtown, which is unlike none other, I think, in this country.
I can make an argument that it's harder to drive in New York than it is in San Francisco.
Oh, for sure. For sure, that's the case.
We got a lot of really great inbounds from listeners and viewers, and they said, why aren't you covering more of the international market? So this week we are. No, Walt and I didn't get on a plane. We didn't go across the pond. We didn't go to Germany. But we had news out of Germany this week that VW CEO Oliver Blum is looking to raise cash for their autonomous vehicle division inside of VW from third-party investors. What do you think this is all about, Walt?
Well, first of all, what does an autonomous division in VW even mean? Because I don't know why an OEM, would do this. This is reminds me of when telcos decided they wanted to get in media and tried to bring that in-house, and it was a disaster. And always tried to kind of build their own as opposed to partnering with the experts in the area. So what do we even know about what exists there and why they would even be doing this?
The division is ADMT, and that stands for Autonomous Driving, Mobility, and Transport, LLC. VW has had a long, tenuous history in autonomous driving. First, they wanted to build it in-house. Then they wanted to go out. They partnered with Argo. That failed. They brought it back in-house. That failed. Then they go and partner with Mobileye. It's this start, stop, and they have never been able to deliver an autonomous driving product to the market. And I don't understand what's really driving them to want to do this and not just partner with a credible partner such as Wave or Neuro or another autonomous driving partner.
Well, what you described does not surprise me in the least. When you have large companies and you have a division which is basically a cost center, I'm sure when things are tight on the top line, they look around, where can they cut costs, and they pull back in precisely these areas because there's no immediate type of payoff. And I'm not sure. The second issue is like, how do you even attract talent, into a division within a larger company? If you're a good engineer, you theoretically want equity in some hot startup that's doing autonomy, or unless some of the larger companies over the years, I think Lucent tried to do this 20 years ago, create equity at that level. Maybe that exists. But at the end of the day, I think maybe VW should just stick to their knitting and look to partner. And then, if one of these technology companies you want to bring in-house later that you've partnered with and maybe had an equity stake with a right of first refusal or something like that, then you bring them in. But trying to grow this internally, I just think is, again, I don't know anyone at VW or anyone in this group, so please don't take offense if you listen to this. And we'd be happy to spend more time with you. Invite us in. Let us kick the tires like so many other, these technology startups have. But based on what you've described to me, that seems like a bad strategy.
If you look at the well-documented turbulent history they've had with autonomy, why, and this is going to take institution level money, why would an institutional investor look to even invest in this? It doesn't seem like it's a fit since there's a well-documented history of turmoil.
In some cases, OEM investments are positive, but in general, when you have like OEMs themselves getting external money to invest in a subsidiary, a minority at an OEM, I don't know. Good luck with that. By the way, they're not the only ones. I think even when Lucid announced their deal with Nuro, they still talked about continuing internal developments at Lucid for their own, at least advanced ADAS, if not future autonomy.
In the same article, Manager Magazine out of Germany, they're saying that both the Porsche side of the house and the VW side of the house are facing a cash crunch, and they're looking to sell their stake in Applied Intuition. So it seems to me that there's desperation in the market, that they're just trying to raise capital.
So yeah, they're selling it but maintaining some internal development. Is that do I understand that correct?
They're looking to sell it purely for a financial return to fund operations because the company's
but they're maintaining their own internal autonomous development, or this is a separate issue.
They're maintaining their own internal development
and yet cutting the external one. So I don't think that makes sense. And frankly, from everything you described, this does not sound at all bad for Applied. They're probably happy to be free of that. It's definitely better, I think, to be Switzerland and, be the partner for any number of OEMs, especially, a partner like that.
Staying on the theme of funding, on Alphabet's Q2 2025 earnings call, Alphabet's CFO said that they're going to commit more resources to companies and other bets such as Waymo. This is a positive sign. What do you make of this? Is this Alphabet's growing confidence in Waymo?
I mean, it sounds like a generic comment to me, a throwaway comment that you put in the call, like, yeah, we're going to put more funding in this thing. So, and without really giving any incremental details on what's going on at Waymo. So like I said earlier in the call, same issue with Tesla. Not a lot of new information to hang our hats on in terms of the Q2 reports of either Google or Tesla on this front. And clearly, Waymo has been a success story. So yeah, of course you're going to say we're going to invest in more, successful things, but not a lot of takeaways from the earnings call for us in the autonomy world.
Just because we didn't get more details on earnings calls, to me, yes, it was just a little bit disappointing, but we're just going to wait for market news because Waymo continues to be the clear leader in robotaxis and they continue to scale. Perhaps there's a big milestone metric that they're getting ready to announce. That could be something to watch in the market.
Yeah, for sure. And, events are also going to mean more than, comments on an earnings call. So, there's never been... We've obviously been able to keep this weekly event chock full of information every week. So I'm not worried about, particularly in the case of Waymo, the leader, in terms of their progress and having more to talk about.
And the one thing is Waymo continues to scale. As Waymo continues to scale, the autonomous trucking industry, which we have not covered a lot lately, continues to scale. This week, Bot Auto, which I've been very fortunate to be in the truck and have experience with service, announced a partnership with Steves & Sons through their partner JB Hunt to run the autonomous service for them. That's a big deal. Bot's got a paying customer now. What do you make of this news?
I think it's great, Grayson. When you get a customer that's obviously important in terms of getting to revenue and getting to, positive EBITDA. And it makes me think more about this business model in terms of how Bot Auto will say, don't worry about whether you have to buy the truck or you have to decide if you're the trucking company, you have to decide whether the driver's in. We're taking on all that on our own. We're just going to move your products from point A to point B. It becomes easier. Now, look, let's be clear, like for this all to work, the table stakes is getting a product that actually works, where you can drive safely a truck with no driver. And certainly Aurora, has made significant strides and, has gotten driver out, and is on that rail, but that's fine. But if other people get to that point, the next thing is going to be, well, how quickly can you sign up customers? And if there's friction in getting customers to commit to own the truck or come up with, whatever commitment they need to do, versus like a Bot Auto model where they're just saying, you're just taking packages. We'll have to see that evolves. Like companies like Aurora and Plus can clearly pivot their business model if this is, creating an issue. It could make that more capital intensive. Investors will have to digest if a greater capital intensity in their business, whether that's something they appreciate. But, I think like getting back to the original thing, a good win for Bot Auto. But look, guys, you got to get that driver out and get your technology work, because none of this really matters unless the technology actually works.
I believe that the technology will work for all of these companies, and you need really great partners. So you have the partners Steves and Sons and JB Hunt. And I want to highlight a quote from the press release here from Scott Lovett. He's the Chief Operating Officer of Steves and Sons. This was a very powerful quote from Mr. Lovett. And quote, "This is not just a technical upgrade, it's a cultural shift. We're investing in the future of American manufacturing by building smarter, safer, and more adaptive supply chain systems that support our employees, our partners, and the customers we serve." End quote. Love the messaging. That messaging resonates with the White House. Why are we not seeing more of that messaging there? Because there is a growing trucking shortage. There's a need for autonomous trucking, and because consumers are continuing to buy goods.
Scott Lovett is not buying the truck. He's not making the decision whether a Steves and Sons truck, has a driver in or driver out. He's just using a service that happens to be autonomous. So it's quite easy for him to say whatever he wants with whatever pricing Bot Auto was willing to give them. So that to me, it's good. It's great. Obviously, we love press releases, but that kind of, I don't care, honestly. It's good that he's willing to use a product, but he's not really committing anything in terms of the technology. And earlier, Grayson, you said, well, you believe that all of these companies will hit the technology. I don't believe that. I want them all to succeed, right? And we keep an open mind to the different approaches. We talk to engineers from one company that attacks the other, and then vice versa, about why one technology will work and one won't. They all sound very convincing. I don't know if they will all succeed. I suspect that most won't, in fact, succeed and get to true driver out. But we certainly hope that they do. So I just want to point that out. Earlier you said you believe they all will. I think maybe you were saying more like you hope. I don't want to speak for you, but I want to make sure our listeners know at least my view on that.
From a technical standpoint, there are clear leaders, and they're well documented on the autonomy leaderboard. And the biggest concerns that I have for a lot of these companies is the business model, the business aspect of it. I believe that the companies that are leading today technically have the ability from an engineering chops to do it, to succeed. The big risk that I see is in the business models and the capital it's going to take to scale these businesses.
Okay, this is a very specific difference between you and I, because my biggest issue is the technology. Because in my view, if this technology works and we are truly autonomous, the business model will follow. And if the business model does not follow with the existing CEO or COO of that company, those two people and more will be replaced until the business model that works is deployed. So I am less concerned, and my mind gets so excited when I think about all the great things that can happen from autonomy. So my biggest concern is always going to be which of these things is actually going to work, not the business model. I think that business model will find a way.
But can they get the funding to build the technology? That's the question.
Sure. I'm not discounting the fact that as you progress, you need to present some mileposts, but the markets are pretty solid right now. You have the IPO market opening up. If you're showing a technology that's not necessarily delivering EBITDA tomorrow or a year from now. I think there is some level of capital that exists, that's willing to invest in the promise of what autonomy offers, whether it's trucking, which is a very large market, or the robotaxi, or ultimately private ownership of autonomous vehicles.
Autonomy has a lot of promise for companies, and some companies are less bullish than others. And you put on your sleuth hat this week and you joined the PACCAR earnings call, where, drum roll please, you got to ask a question. What did you ask? How did you get on the call? Did you say, hi, my name is Trucking Analyst 101? How did you get on there?
I logged on the call. PACCAR is a fairly large size company. I mean, I think our firm is certainly well known and respected within the TMT industry. So it was, you never know. You log on to like a trucker's call and like they're gonna be like, who the hell is Lightshed? The CEO of that company, Preston, is certainly very slick, very well coached. I obviously was asking about Aurora. As everyone knows, Aurora went driver out in what was a PACCAR truck, and PACCAR said, put the driver back in. So I'm like, I basically asked to Preston, the CEO, well, why? Like, why are you doing that? And you have other partners. So let me just read his first response. We see others making progress as well. We always operate at PACCAR with the safety being our most fundamental foundation principle. And so for us, we want that to remain as the true north. I guess he meant North Star. Maybe the transcript is bad. North Star for us. If that remains as a true north for us, and so that having a driver in seems like the smartest idea, and that's how we're going to operate the trucks. So everyone's probably listening to this and being like, what was just said? And that's what a professional CEO says, which is nothing. When they get a question, they basically say nothing. But at Lightshed, we don't, and this is probably why we don't get questions on some calls. We don't just allow that question to sit. We'd ask a follow-up question. So I specifically came back and I was like, is there a certain milestone that you want to achieve? Because obviously if you always want Aurora to have a driver in, that's going to be a problem for their business model. So Preston then gave a little bit more insight here. Preston, again, the CEO of PACCAR. We don't ever discuss what we're doing when we go to production, but always what we do is things should be fully production. And when things are fully production, validated, completed production, then that's when we have that conversation. So what that told me is, I don't think there's some dialogue. It doesn't feel like when I'm talking to the CEO of PACCAR, there's some dialogue where like next week or next month that he's going to dial up and say like in that one route that Aurora's in, or if they expand to 3 routes, that he's going to be like, okay, you can take that driver out. He wants to get to a point where there is production of that Aurora truck, not the 1 or 2 that have been outfitted, with this technology. So my sense was that we're probably going to see a driver in that seat for a while. And I think then, from an Aurora standpoint, you got to start, asking more about, well, when do we see Volvo? And by the way, like I'm on Aurora's side here. I think PACCAR is probably being, overly cautious. This underscores the issue that these technology companies have. This is exactly what I was talking about as it relates to bot auto, the friction that exists in terms of getting someone else to commit to have their truck have a driver out. And then if someone actually bought that truck and took ownership of that truck and put their logo, whether it was a JB Hunt logo or whatever, to take that ownership, that is friction, I think in the business model that we need to consider. While we may be excited about Aurora and we may believe they're ahead, there's a whole ecosystem that has to be convinced, before you can get to the point where you're generating revenue with a product that is truly driver out.
We talked about safety earlier with Tesla, but I want to highlight Mr. Nat Buse. He's the chief safety officer at Aurora. The gentleman is extremely smart, one of the best in the business on safety. And I truly believe what he has published, that they did close the safety case. And I believe that what Aurora was doing, driver out, was completely safe. And it's unfortunate that they weren't able to scale up because of PACCAR's demands that we saw there very publicly in the Aurora blog post. So based on what you learned on the earnings call, the public blog post of Mr. Urmson on the Aurora blog, and now you're starting to see Volvo with the VNL, their autonomous truck, they're starting to say, we're testing it, they're ramping up. Do we see a point, hypothetically, where the next driver out for Aurora is in the Volvo truck?
That's what it feels like based on that comment, but things change, right? I mean, I don't know where Aurora is in their, getting to however Preston defines production is. Maybe I'm missing that altogether, and there is a definition of production that they think that they can get to in the near term. But that'll be I think for maybe Aurora to ask on their upcoming earnings call.
Are you going to dial into the Aurora earnings call and ask a question?
I mean, I'm going to log for a question. Whether I get selected for a question, I don't know. But if you're listening, Aurora, you know the exact question I'm going to be asking. I'm going to say, I talked to PACCAR. This is what they said. What does this mean? That's simple. You know what the question is ahead of time. You can prepare.
Preparing is good, especially when you're making food or you're preparing for an earnings call. Either way, you have to be prepared, and we're always prepared here at Autonomy Markets every week. Well, so obviously we have the Aurora earnings call next week. What else do we need to look for in the Autonomy Markets over the next week?
Apple's having an earnings call, but I doubt Autonomy will be a part of that. Amazon has their earnings call. Again, I doubt you hear much of anything about Zoox. Maybe they'll talk about Vegas. Who knows? There's a LiDAR company, Ava, that's doing an investor day in New York City. They've got definitely an interesting approach that touches many different industry segments beyond just vehicles. So, it should be another busy week for us, Grayson.
It's going to be a busy week, with great content, great stories, and great analysis by us. The future is bright, the future is autonomous, the future is Autonomy Markets. Walt, until next week.